Hi everybody, I'm Mike Poland, the scientist in charge of the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, and this is the monthly update for July 1st of 2022. Now, of course, the big event in Yellowstone during the month of June was the flooding. Between June 10th and 13th, an atmospheric river event impacted the area. That's a weather system of warm, moist air from the tropics. And it dropped more than 2 to 3 inches of rain in places in the Yellowstone area. And this contributed to helping to melt some of that snow that was on the ground. It was an unusually cool and snowy spring. And all of this water ended up in the river systems. And in fact, because of the long history of monitoring rivers in the Yellowstone area, we know that this flood was unprecedented in the history of that monitoring. There is a stream gauge on the Yellowstone River in Corwin Springs. This is just north of Yellowstone National Park, with a record that goes back to 1892. Now, the previous high water mark at that gauge was 11.5 feet, and that occurred in 1918, along with a flow rate of about 32,000 cubic feet per second. But on June 13th, at that gauge, the record high was shattered as the flood level reached 14 feet, and the flow rate was in excess of 50,000 cubic feet per second. And of course, it caused a tremendous amount of damage to the road system in Yellowstone National Park, with lots of small landslides and many washouts of the roads. This will be something that the park recovers from quite a while. But fortunately, the park is reopening. As of July 2nd, the northern loop should also be reopened. So there are really intense efforts to try to get Yellowstone reopened so people can see this amazing landscape. YVO has gotten a lot of questions as to whether or not the large amounts of water that were in the system might impact seismic activity or hydrothermal activity, and the answer is probably not. It is true that faults can be lubricated by water, but most of that water comes from beneath. It rises up from depth and doesn't necessarily percolate down from above. There's also no indication that there would be an increase in any threat of hydrothermal explosions. Those are episodes where subsurface water suddenly flashes to steam. You need an event to cause that, for all of that subsurface water to suddenly turn into steam, a depressurization event of some kind. And the flood just doesn't do that. The one possible impact we might see is perhaps a little bit more frequent geyser activity. There is evidence when we look back at the long record, for example, of Old Faithful eruptions, that years with more precipitation see a slightly more frequent eruptive interval for Old Faithful, in that the time between eruptions decreases slightly. It's not much, maybe a few minutes, but it is statistically significant. And whether or not that occurs as a result of this precipitation in June or precipitation going forward, well, that's something we'll just have to wait and see. So now turning to the earthquake and deformation and geyser activity that we did record during the month of June, the University of Utah seismograph stations, which tracks earthquake activity in Yellowstone through the Yellowstone Seismic Network, located 149 earthquakes, which is pretty average for the Yellowstone region. The largest event occurred on June 12th, and it was a magnitude 2.4 located just to the south of Mammoth Hot Springs. Now, this was part of a swarm of events, of about 67 events that occurred in mid-June, and in late June, this swarm continued with another 29 events or so, and then there was a small swarm during the early part of June, June 7th, that occurred in the southern part of the park. So earthquake activity in the Yellowstone region during June was pretty normal. Now let's turn to ground deformation. This is vertical deformation at the White Lake GPS station. This is on the east side of the caldera, the Sour Creek Resurgent Dome. Each one of these blue dots is 1 day's worth of data, and this plot spans 2 years. Downward trends indicate subsidence, and upward trends indicate uplift. Now, over this 2 period, the region has gone down at an average rate of 1 to 2 inches a year or so. And we've been seeing that at the station since 2015. And that really has continued up to the present. That subsidence may be pausing right now, but that's a pretty common event in summers. You can see the same thing happened during the summer of 2021, when that subsidence pause turned into a slight amount of uplift. And this is as rainwater and especially snowmelt percolates into the subsurface and sort of puffs the ground up, kind of like a sponge soaking up water. Moving to the other side of the caldera and the Mallard Lake Resurgent Dome, this is from a GPS station near Old Faithful, and we see the same overall trend of subsidence over this 2-year time period. But again, it occurs in slight episodes as meltwater infiltrates the ground and puffs it up like a bit of a sponge during summer months. At the Norris Geyser Basin, we haven't seen many changes in the last couple of years. There's this deviation here that occurs in December of 2021, but that's because of snow covering the GPS antenna. And once that snow went away after a particularly severe winter storm, we were back to the previous level for this station. So that's sort of an anomaly there caused by weather. That looks like there is a slight amount of subsidence, maybe half of an inch or so that's occurred over the last couple of months at Norris. Otherwise, things are pretty steady in the Norris area. And finally, turning to everyone's favorite geyser, Steamboat Geyser, the tallest geyser in the world in the Norris area. We had 2 eruptions during the month of June, one here on June 10th and one here on June 20th. This is the temperature record in the Steamboat outflow channel. All of this sort of up and down activity, minor eruptions that culminates in a major eruption. Then the geyser goes dry and we see daily temperature variations just from solar heating. More minor eruptive activity culminating in a major on June 20th, and then back to that daily temperature variation due to solar heating. Now, we're not seeing, as of the end of June, any minor geyser activity that's recorded by this particular sensor. And we expect to see that kind of minor geyser activity before any major eruption. So it doesn't appear that there is a major eruption that is imminent right now, but of course we'll just have to wait and see whether Steamboat gives us a bit more of a show in the month of July. Well, that does it for the July 1st, 2022 update. Now remember, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to email us anytime. Our email address is yvowebteam, that's all one word, at usgs.gov. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, have a great month. See you later.